All right, strap in, everyone. Today's deep dive is going to take us down a seriously wild what-if rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, we're going deep on this
We're
one.
talking about what if the Roman Empire just never fell?
What if they just kept going?
What if instead of crumbling, they just kept conquering and building and Romanizing?
It's a big one.
Huge. Our sources for this are, well, they paint a pretty crazy picture of what a never-ending Roman Empire could have meant. It's not just about, bigger borders.
Not at all. It's way more than that.
Yeah, they're saying it would have completely reshaped the world as we know it. Everything. To the point where we might all be speaking Latin right now.
Maybe. It's not totally out of the realm of possibility. The sources dive into how Rome's influence, if it just kept rolling, could have led to a truly global civilization.
So, everyone's wearing togas and calling each other citizen?
Not quite, but in a way, yeah. Think about it. Roman law, their systems of government, their culture, it wouldn't just disappear. It would probably become the foundation for tons of societies all over the planet.
So not just togas and gladiators.
No. We're talking about the very core of how societies function. Law, governance, infrastructure, all of it with a distinctly Roman flavor.
Okay, so give me an example. How would that actually play out?
Well, let's take Roman law. Their legal system was super advanced for its time. Concepts like property rights, contracts, due process. Imagine those spreading throughout the world, shaping legal systems even thousands of years later.
Whoa, so we might all be following Roman legal principles without even knowing it.
It's possible. But there's a flip side to that, right?
Yeah.
A system designed for one empire, even a massive one, might not work for everyone.
Right, trying to apply Roman law to, a tiny village in, I don't know, ancient China, that probably wouldn't go over so well.
Exactly. The sources point out that maintaining control over that kind of diversity would be a constant headache for any global empire.
It's one thing to conquer a territory, but to actually govern it, keep everyone happy.
It's a whole other ballgame, especially with an empire that stretches from, say, the frozen north of Scandinavia all the way down to sub-Saharan Africa.
Talk about a logistical nightmare. Even with their awesome roads, just getting messages back and forth would take forever.
And that's not even considering the potential for, well, corruption.
Oh, right, because power corrupts. And the more power you have,
The more tempting it gets to abuse it. The sources don't sugarcoat that. Even with the best intentions, managing a global empire would be, well, incredibly difficult.
And Rome wasn't exactly known for its squeaky clean politics, even on a smaller scale.
True. So you magnify that to a global level, it gets messy.
But they did have that whole Roman citizenship thing. Would that have changed in this scenario?
Potentially. The sources suggest that Roman citizenship might have evolved.
Yeah.
Instead of being this exclusive thing for a select few.
It could have been open to, everyone.
Everyone within the empire's borders.
Whoa, so one giant global Roman club, everyone's a citizen.
It's a radical idea. But the sources argue that it could lead to more social mobility, less internal conflict.
A more unified world. Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal here. Less division, more opportunity. It's a nice thought.
It is. But let's not forget, we're still talking about Rome here. They weren't exactly known for being hands-off rulers.
Right. The sources don't pretend this alternate history is all sunshine and rainbows. There would definitely be downsides.
Absolutely. But they also highlight the cultural impact, which would be incredible. Imagine centuries of blending and mixing. Roman traditions merging with countless others.
Yeah, it'd be like a global melting pot, wouldn't it?
Exactly. The art, architecture, religion, language. It would be a constant exchange of ideas and traditions.
And wouldn't that affect daily life? The source mentions these Roman cities, super advanced aqueducts, public baths. Was everyone living the good life?
Not necessarily everyone, but the source does paint a picture of Roman cities as being way ahead of their time. Think of sophisticated sewage systems, public fountains, even early forms of underfloor heating.
Wow, underfloor heating? Sounds pretty cozy.
It had been a stark contrast to how people lived in other parts of the world.
So, Roman cities were these futuristic hubs, but all that stuff takes resources, right? How could they keep that up for so long?
That's where Rome's economic power comes in. Their control over trade routes, like the Silk Road and the Mediterranean.
They'd be raking it in.
Exactly. They'd control the flow of goods and resources between East and West, accumulating wealth and influence.
So they're not just a military and political force.
They're an economic powerhouse, too. And the sources even suggest that this could lead to something truly wild.
Okay, lay it on me. What's wilder than a global, never-ending Roman Empire?
A Roman industrial revolution.
Wait, hold on. A Roman industrial revolution? Are we talking steam-powered chariots and mass-produced togas?
Uh, Maybe not those things specifically, but the concept is mind-blowing. Remember, Romans were already brilliant engineers. They had aqueducts, concrete, roads that span their empire.
Right, they weren't slouches.
Exactly. So imagine what they could have achieved with a few extra centuries of development, plus all the resources of a global empire.
So are you saying they could fast-forwarded technology by, like, hundreds of years?
It's a possibility. The sources dive deep into this, suggesting that Roman engineers could have made huge breakthroughs in steam power, hydraulics, even early automation.
Wow, so instead of togas, we might be wearing, like, Roman spacesuits right now.
Well, maybe not spacesuits. But the sources do mention the possibility of even more impressive Roman roads and architecture, things that would completely dwarf anything we know from our timeline.
Okay, now I really wish we had a time machine. Imagine seeing a Roman city with skyscrapers and advanced transportation, all built with their engineering genius.
It's a wild thought, and it leads us to another fascinating angle: the impact on scientific progress.
Because a wealthy, stable empire wouldn't just focus on building stuff, right? They'd have the brains and the money to delve into, like, pure science.
Precisely. Think about the potential advancements in medicine, astronomy, mathematics. Roman scholars, with the backing of a long-lasting empire, could have made discoveries centuries ahead of our timeline.
So, like, a Roman-powered scientific revolution.
It's a tantalizing possibility. The source really emphasizes the sheer potential for scientific progress in this alternate Roman world.
Okay, so we've got a global superpower, tech innovators, scientific geniuses. Are we talking about a Roman utopia here?
Not so fast. While the sources highlight the potential, they also acknowledge the challenges. And they point out that Rome's influence wouldn't be limited to its borders. It would ripple outwards, touching societies all over the world.
So, like, Romanization on a global scale.
Think about it. With their military might, their economic power, their cultural influence,
Yeah.
they'd be in a prime position to shape the world in their image. Laws, governance, even fashion and entertainment, all with a Roman spin.
So maybe not everyone in togas, but maybe everyone with, like, a little bit of Rome in their lives. But would that be a good thing?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll tackle head-on in the next part of our deep dive. Because while a globally unified, technologically advanced, Roman-led world sounds pretty cool.
There are probably some serious downsides, too.
Absolutely. What happens to individual cultures when faced with that kind of influence? What are the risks of putting so much power in the hands of one empire, even one as impressive as Rome?
Those are some heavy questions. I'm definitely ready to dig into those.
Well, then stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break to explore the other side of this alternate history coin. Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were painting a pretty rosy picture of this Roman-led world, all the cool tech and the global unity.
It was pretty tempting.
Right, but now it's time to flip that coin and take a look at the other side.
The downsides.
Exactly, because even with all those advancements, a world dominated by one empire, no matter how cool, comes with some baggage, some serious potential downsides.
Okay, let's unpack that. It's easy to get swept up in the wow factor of, like, a Roman industrial revolution, but yeah, there's got to be another side to the story.
There is. One of the biggest things the source brings up is cultural assimilation. Even if everyone's a Roman citizen, even if everyone technically has equal rights, how do you keep different cultures alive in the face of this one giant dominant force?
That's a really good point. Like, even in our timeline, when Rome was way smaller, they still had a big impact on the cultures they conquered.
Right, brought their language, their laws, their gods.
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure to conform.
Exactly. Now imagine a world where Rome never goes away, where their influence just keeps growing for centuries across continents. That pressure to conform would be immense.
Whoa. So instead of this beautiful mix of cultures, we end up with, like, a planet full of mini Romes.
It's a possibility. And the sources, well, they bring up some uncomfortable questions about cultural imperialism. Even if Rome doesn't actively try to destroy other cultures, their sheer power could lead to a slow but steady loss of cultural identity for tons of societies.
It's like their culture just kind of swallows everything else up.
In a way, yeah. And it's not just culture. What about political systems? If Roman law and administration become the gold standard for the entire world, does that mean other ways of governing just disappear?
Like, is there room for innovation if everyone's following the Roman model?
That's something the sources grapple with. They suggest that the Roman way, while it worked for them, might not be the best fit for every single society. Imagine trying to apply a system made for a giant empire to, like, a small, isolated village that's done things its own way for centuries.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over well. People would feel like their way of life is being threatened.
Exactly. Which brings us to another potential downside. Rebellions.
Oh, right, because people don't just sit back and let their culture or their way of life be erased.
Nope. And even in our timeline, Rome had to deal with tons of uprisings.
Now imagine those uprisings happening on a global scale, and not just for a few years.
But for centuries.
Talk about a never-ending headache. Even with their legions and their fancy tech, wouldn't it be impossible to keep everyone under control?
It would be a constant battle. A battle that would drain resources, lead to brutal crackdowns, and probably create more resentment than it solves.
This Roman utopia is starting to sound less utopian by the minute. So we've got cultural assimilation, political suppression, constant rebellions. What else? What other downsides are we looking at?
Well, let's talk about money, economics. The sources talk about Rome becoming this global economic powerhouse, which sounds impressive,
But there's always a but.
Right. Think about it. An empire that controls most of the world's trade routes, that gets to call the shots on commerce. That's a recipe for some serious inequality.
Oh, yeah. A tiny elite hoarding all the wealth while everyone else struggles.
Exactly. And that kind of inequality breeds instability.
It's like a powder keg waiting to explode. Revolutions, uprisings.
Exactly. That saying, power corrupts. It's a cliche for a reason. And absolute power, well, that's a whole other level of danger, even if Rome starts off with noble goals.
The temptation to abuse that power, to exploit the system.
It would be immense. The sources emphasize that. They say a never-ending Roman Empire would need constant vigilance against corruption. Always on guard.
But wouldn't that lead to some seriously intense surveillance, like Big Brother watching everyone all the time?
It's a trade-off, right? You want stability, you need control. But control often comes at the cost of individual freedom and privacy.
So in this Roman world, maybe dissent isn't tolerated, maybe freedom of speech is limited.
It's a possibility. The sources don't shy away from that. In a world where Rome's power is basically limitless, the scales tip heavily in favor of control, even if it means sacrificing individual liberties.
Okay, so we've got cultural assimilation, political control, economic inequality, and now the erosion of individual freedom. This Roman utopia isn't looking so bright anymore. But what about technology? Didn't we talk about all the cool advancements they could make? Wouldn't that benefit everyone?
Technology is a tricky thing. It can be used for good, but it can also be used for bad.
So, like, instead of Roman aqueducts, we get Roman super weapons.
Maybe not super weapons, but imagine an empire with advanced weaponry, sophisticated surveillance tech, the ability to control information on a global scale.
That's kind of scary.
It is. And it reminds us that technology isn't inherently good or evil. It's a tool.
And like any tool, it depends on who's holding it and what they plan to do with it.
Exactly. So instead of a utopia, this Roman-led world could become a dystopia. A world where technology is used to suppress dissent and maintain control.
It's a chilling thought. It makes you wonder, would our world have ended up the same way if Rome had stayed in charge? Would we be living in some kind of techno-dystopia?
We can't know for sure. But the important thing is to remember that history isn't set in stone. It's shaped by choices, actions, reactions.
So while it's fun to speculate about this alternate timeline, we also have to remember that there's no single answer to the question of what if.
Right. And that's what makes this whole exploration so fascinating. It's not about finding definite answers. It's about asking thought-provoking questions and challenging how we think about the past and even the present.
So we've covered some pretty heavy stuff. Cultural assimilation, political control, economic inequality, the dangers of unchecked technology. It's a lot to process.
It is. But it's important to remember that this is all hypothetical. We're not saying this is how it would have happened if Rome never fell.
Right. We're just exploring possibilities, looking at different sides of the coin.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from this is that even the most powerful empires, they aren't invincible. They have weaknesses, they make mistakes, they eventually change or fade away.
Even a never-ending Roman Empire wouldn't be immune to that. It would face challenges, it would adapt, it would eventually transform.
And that's something to keep in mind. Empires rise and fall, but their influence lingers.
So even though we can't say for sure what would have happened if Rome had stuck around, we can say that the world would be a very different place.
No doubt. In some ways, it already is different thanks to Rome's influence. Their legacy is all around us.
That's true. Even though their empire crumbled, their ideas, their innovations, they're still shaping our world today.
And that's a good transition to our next topic, I think.
Oh, you mean like what parts of Roman culture and innovation had the biggest impact, even after all this time?
Exactly. And how those influences might have been even stronger in a world where Rome never fell. That's what we'll dig into in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive. We've been exploring this alternate timeline where the Roman Empire just, keeps going and going.
A world of never-ending legions and togas.
Exactly. But even though their empire did eventually fall in our timeline, their influence, it's still around us, everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what's so cool about this thought experiment, right? By imagining a world where Rome never went away, we're actually seeing how much their legacy is baked into our own society.
It's like we can't escape Rome, even thousands of years later. So, let's get specific. What are some of the biggest Roman fingerprints we can see on the world today?
Well, the most obvious one is probably language. Latin itself might not be a common language anymore, but its impact on modern languages is huge.
Right, like French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese.
All those Romance languages, they came from Latin. And those are spoken by, what, billions of people?
It's crazy to think that something from so long ago is still shaping how we talk today. And it's not just the Romance languages either, right? Even English, which isn't directly descended from Latin, borrows a ton from it.
Especially in fields like law, medicine, science. It shows you how powerful Roman culture was, how it spread and adapted and just stuck around.
But language is just one piece of the puzzle. What about, like, architecture? You see Roman stuff everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Arches, columns, domes. Those are all classic Roman elements that we see in buildings even now.
It's true. Sometimes I walk around and I'm like, wait, is this ancient Rome or just downtown?
Huh. I know what you mean. And it's not just the way things look either. Roman engineering, their construction techniques, those have influenced how we build for centuries.
Think about concrete. That was a Roman invention.
A game changer. It allowed them to build structures that were strong and lasted a long time, and we're still using it today everywhere. And don't forget about infrastructure, their roads, their aqueducts, their sewer systems.
All super advanced for their time.
They basically invented the concept of public works projects. And those ideas, they laid the foundation for the infrastructure systems that we rely on today.
Okay, so we've got language, architecture, engineering. What other areas of life have that Roman stamp on them?
Well, law and government are big ones. The Roman legal system was super complex, and it set up a lot of the principles that modern legal systems are based on.
Like the idea of due process, property rights, the separation of powers.
Exactly. All those have roots in Roman law. And in a world where Rome never falls, that legal legacy would be even more powerful. Imagine Roman law as the basis for a global legal system.
That's a wild thought. Would it have created a more fair and just world?
It's hard to say for sure. The sources suggest that Roman legal principles, with their emphasis on order and fairness, could have helped create a more unified and equitable world. But there would be challenges too, of course.
Yeah, we talked about that before. A global legal system based on Roman law would have to deal with different cultures, different interpretations.
It wouldn't be easy, but it's still fascinating to consider. To think that a civilization from thousands of years ago could have such a lasting impact on how we govern ourselves.
It really makes you appreciate the power of ideas. Rome might be gone, but their ideas about law, government, civilization, they're still with us. They're shaping our world. And if their influence is that strong now, imagine if they'd never fallen. Would we all be speaking Latin, wearing togas, living by Roman law?
It's fun to think about, isn't it? Would we be more unified, more orderly, or would we be facing the same challenges and contradictions that we've been discussing?
Who knows? But that's what I love about these what-if scenarios.
Me too. It lets us explore possibilities, use our imaginations, and really appreciate how complex history is.
So while our journey through this alternate timeline is ending, I think we've all gained a new perspective on Rome and its impact on the world. It's a legacy that's still unfolding, even after all these years.
Absolutely. Their rise and fall shape the course of history, and their influence is still felt today in ways we might not even realize.
And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep discovering the amazing connections that tie us to the past and shape the world around us.